Can you learn too much? Well, actually, yes, and you've probably already hit the limit for your lifetime. Quick, speak French to me right now. You can't, can you? Which is strange when you think about it, because you've at least spent 2 years of your life learning that language, or maybe another one in school. That's 200 hours of your life spent learning something that you don't remember. But you learned to ride a bike in a couple of hours, and you'll remember that for the rest of your life. So why has the brain kept the bike but removed the language? You'd rather speak the language, right? It seems more useful. So why has the brain kept the least useful skill? Because it's not to do with usefulness. It's to do with where each skill is stored in the brain, because they're not all stored in the same place. And one of these places is basically permanent. Explain to me in words how to ride a bike. Go ahead. How do you balance? Where are you putting your feet? Which muscles are you using to move the pedals? You can't, can you? Even though you know exactly how to do it, you can't put it into words. But French, or your chosen language, you can probably still remember a few facts, like how bonjour means hello, or how certain words are masculine or feminine. And that's quite strange. Why can you remember facts about the thing you can't do anymore, but can't explain the thing you can do? Because they're stored in completely different systems of the brain. The first is procedural memory. That's stuff like typing or swimming or riding a bike. It's the things you can do but can't explain. And it's stored in the cerebellum, deep in the back of the brain. And the other is called declarative memory. That's the stuff like languages or facts or formulas, E equals mc squared. You can explain them, but you can't exactly do them. And those are stored in the hippocampus. Two very different memory filing systems, and the brain treats them very, very differently, which we'll get onto. This is the distinction between skills that can be taught by words or reading and skills that have to be learned by actions and doing. Well, kind of. Because weirdly, someone who moves to France to learn French can become fluent in months, compared to your 2 years of classroom study just to remember a few sentences. Why are they more successful, and why can they still remember the language years later? As it turns out, the brain treats these different types of French as different skills altogether. One of them is stored in the I'm gonna keep forever pile, and the other is stored in the maybe we'll delete this later pile. Your brain makes that very decision millions of times a day with all of the information that comes into it. And it's making that decision right now about this video. It's deciding whether the information we've already spoken about should be kept or tossed. If you stopped watching this video right now, your brain wouldn't remember any of the information by tomorrow morning. Which kind of makes you think, what's the point in watching this video if you're just going to forget it all by tomorrow morning? And that depends, because there's a difference between the information your brain will delete and the information it can't delete. And when you understand how those two systems work, you get to choose what stays and what goes. You get to make sure that the stuff you want to stick actually does. So let me show you what's actually happening when the brain throws something away. Here's the thing, your brain is not like a hard drive. Despite what people on the internet think, we are not computers. We maintain our skills like muscles. The more we use them, the stronger they get. You stop using them and your brain dissolves them. It is quite literally dissolving the neural pathways it's created if you don't use them. And that's because maintaining them takes energy, and energy is a limited resource. There's actually a famous study that proves this perfectly. Researchers took a group of people and taught them how to juggle. And after that, they took scans of their brain, and it showed the motor regions of their brain had physically grew in size. And then after that, they said, well, just stop juggling for 3 months. Don't even touch the balls. After they re-scanned their brains, the motor regions had shrunk back to their original size. The brain had quite literally removed that skill like a surgeon from them. And this is happening constantly, all of the time. Your brain is running a calculation. Are we using this skill right now? Well, no. So why are we spending the energy to maintain it? Those 200 hours of French that you used, your brain is like, no, actually we live in England. There's no point in us having this. And that's not the brain being lazy, that's the brain being efficient. Just like a good manager, it's going to reallocate resources in order to do things that you actually need to do. That's exactly why people who move to France to learn French become fluent. They have to use it every single day to do the most basic of tasks, like speak to other people. The brain sees that skill as essential, so it maintains it. It keeps it in good order. Your classroom French, when are you ever going to use that again? So it gets tossed. But then why is riding a bike immune if you only do it once a year? What's the point in maintaining that neural connection? And why don't people who learned French in France forget it when they go back to their own country for a year or two, let's say? Why don't the procedural skills get deleted as often as the declarative skills? Because the procedural memory is almost permanent. And there's an evolutionary reason for that. Think about it for a second. Running, jumping, swimming, climbing. If our ancestors didn't have these skills to get away from predators, we would just die. So the ones that did forget these skills didn't survive long enough to pass on their genes. Over the many generations of humans, the ones that survived were the ones that locked these procedural skills into the brain, making them way more resistant to decay. And this gets really weird when you look at the extreme cases, for example. There are people with amnesia so severe that they can't remember faces, they can't form new memories at all, but they do remember how to play the piano. The famous case obviously being Clive Waring. He had amnesia so severe that he thought he was waking up for the first time every 30 seconds. However, if you sat him at a piano, he could conduct an orchestra. He could play pieces flawlessly. And that's because that's exactly the skill he spent years developing before his accident. His procedural memory is completely untouched, whereas his declarative memory is destroyed. His cerebellum kept those important motor neurons safe, and his hippocampus didn't really care. But let's be real for a second. The brain is only so big, so there has to be some sort of skill budget that can be stored in the cerebellum to be protected at all costs. Well, the brain as a whole can store about 3 petabytes of information, and that's about 75 copies of every single book ever written stored in one place. So what is this upper limit? How many skills can one person hold? For your brain as a whole, it's probably less than you think. But for procedural skills in the cerebellum, it's practically unlimited. Your cerebellum is huge and incredibly efficient. It can stack motor patterns on top of other motor patterns very, very well without breaking a sweat. This is why you can drive and text and look where you're going at the same time, even though you shouldn't. But declarative memory, that's very limited. Your brain has a working bottleneck, and it's known as Miller's Law. You can only hold 7 plus or minus 2 items in your declarative memory at once. That's why physical skills like typing and driving you can do all simultaneously. However, you can't remember more than 9 phone numbers or speak more than 3 languages at once. Think about it like this. Your brain manages skills in tiers. At the top, you've got permanent skills like walking, talking, and breathing. You use them so much every day that they are practically permanent and will never decay. Then you've got active skills like your job or your daily habits or sports that you play regularly. They'll be maintained as long as you keep doing them. Then you have dormant skills, stuff like the instrument you used to play back in high school, or maybe that language you learned while you were abroad. These are the skills that you don't really have, but will come back quickly if you practice them. And then at the very bottom, you have your lost skills. This is the French that you learned 10 years ago and absolutely never used outside the classroom. Theoretically, this shouldn't happen because there are more neural connections in your brain possible than there are stars in the observable universe. But practically, your brain has limited energy. It's not going to maintain connections if you're not using them. So your actual skill budget is way, way smaller than the theoretical maximum. But what is that magical number? That ceiling of skills that you can possibly have in your brain at one time? Well, it depends on how well you can do those skills. When you master a skill so deeply and you are in the top 1% of the people who can do it, your brain reorganizes itself and it shrinks other areas of the brain in order to do it. There's a famous study done on London cab drivers. To get certified in London to be a cab driver, you have to remember 25,000 streets. Every turn, every alleyway, every little shortcut, you've got to know it all. When they scanned their brains, they found that their hippocampus, or their memory center, was significantly larger than every other person's. However, there was a catch, because they performed worse on every single other memory test. Their brains had sacrificed general memory capacity in order to specialize in a certain navigation area. They got really good at one thing by getting worse at everything else. The wild thing to me about this is that it quite literally restructures your brain. It turns you from one person into someone completely different, not metaphorically, but physically. Kim Peek, or the guy that Rain Man was based off, is the perfect example of this, the absolute extreme. He memorized, word for word, 12,000 different books, every single phone number in the phone book, every road on the map, a completely different brain structure to what he had at birth. But he couldn't button up his own shirts. He had practically infinite declarative storage and zero procedural ability. The trade-off is very real and very physical. If you get really good at one thing, your brain gets awful at everything else. And this makes me wonder, personally, about things like Neuralink, artificially augmenting the brain, maybe to retain more of these memory connections or to just have more storage in general. What if we could download skills, put them on a USB stick and plug them in to the brain to have practically infinite skills, kind of like the Matrix? Is that possible in our future? Well, if we could download them, what skills would they be? And I think that's pretty much confirmed to be procedural, like Kung Fu, exactly, from The Matrix. These skills would actually stick. As we've said, they're stored in the cerebellum. It's extremely resistant to decay and has a practically unlimited amount of storage. But if you downloaded declarative knowledge, fact, formulas, languages as pure information, they would fade pretty much instantly. And this is why, even if you downloaded a procedural skill, like Kung Fu, you'd still have to practice it in order to bypass your brain's deletion system. The hard part is not the upload, even though we still can't do that. The hard part will be fighting the natural instinct of the brain to prune and condense information. And like I've just said, with our current technology like Neuralink, we are years and years away from being able to do anything like this. We can barely read simple signals from the brain at this point in time. Never mind put complex neuron connections into place by hand. The Matrix did make it look like you can just plug a cable into your brain and bam, you've got a skill. But the reality is our brains are way more complex than that. We are not just a living hard drive. We are a complex system that is constantly overriding itself. So unfortunately, in our lifetimes, we will never be Neo, which is sad, but it does bring me back to my original question. Can you learn too much? Technically speaking, no. You could learn to play 10 instruments and speak 5 languages fluently, master a dozen sports, and your cerebellum would be pretty much fine with it. But declarative memory, yes, absolutely, there is a ceiling. And if you try to push that ceiling, you'll forget how to tie up your own shirt. So the real question here isn't can you learn too much, it's are you learning the right things. Procedural skills can pretty much last forever with minimal maintenance. If you play the guitar one time a month, you're still going to remember how to do it decades later. Speak a language regularly enough and you'll probably remember it for the rest of your life. But those declarative facts, they need constant review. Those 200 hours of French or German or whatever other language you learned in high school, if you would have used those 200 hours to learn to play guitar, for example, you'd still be able to do that now. The bike stuck and the French didn't. And it's not because the brain ran out of space, it's because the brain made a choice about what was worth keeping. The way you learn something will decide whether you keep that information in the future. Use it to your advantage and you can learn pretty much anything. So next time you forget something that you learned in school, don't stress too much about it. Your brain made that choice without you consciously being there to oversee it. Something more important took its place, something that you're actually going to use. On vit et on apprend, or something like that. I'm not really sure. Now watch this video, and I promise it's worth your time. It's better than doom scrolling, isn't it? Anyway, see you next time.